Okay, hello. I had to make a video because we had to make a decision. We've been running Class UI for a while now, and it started out as a complete experiment, moving from Tailwind CSS, where we added typing on top of it, and then converting that into a Babel plugin concept, where we diverge more and more from Tailwind CSS, because Tailwind CSS has a big issue with specificity. And part of that story is how they structure their class names. So we learned a ton through that experience, and we weren't sure where the project was going. And then it seemed like everything was finalized, but of course there were certain things we weren't happy with. Things like it actually being a Babel plugin. Like technically it's pretty awesome, but you have to, for the consumer of the project, it's kind of sometimes mind-bending how you're going to set it up and integrate it with your build tools, which is not ideal at all. And then you also, when you build for production, it's different than when you work with it in development, because you create a CSS file and you have to figure out how to include that CSS file with your code, which also requires build setup. And then during development, you're not really writing JavaScript, even though it looks like it, which could also cause some confusion. And then we also completely underestimated the complexity of pseudo decorators, because they can be insanely complex. Like, it's not only hover and disabled. You can say like hover and disable, but not when active, for example. Like, it's crazy. So, but we have gotten so much feedback through this. And again, we have learned so much. And all of this learning was put into an idea where we took a different perspective. Like, how could we take everything we learned that was awesome about Class UI and put it into a more typical runtime CSS in JS solution? And so I did a small take on that, and I showed it to Fabrice, which I'm working with Class UI on, and it makes so much more sense. Yeah, it's a brand new take on CSS in JS, and I'm going to talk about it, but it's built on everything that's happening in Class UI. And the thing is, with open source, we can't do everything. Maintaining a project takes a lot of work, and especially a project like Class UI, because there are so many quirks related to build tools. While doing a pure CSS in JS solution is far less maintenance, because we don't have to care about the stuff around it. So we have to let you know that before it was even released, we are going to deprecate Class UI in favor of focusing on this project instead. And I know some people have started using Class UI with their projects, testing it out, and I'm really sorry that we're not going to continue down that path. But still, if you hadn't done that, given the feedback, we would have never come up with this idea. And I hope that when I go through this now, it becomes obvious that this is the right solution. So Class UI started as an experiment and it ended as an experiment. But it produce the ideas and learnings necessary to build something new in the CSS in JS ecosystem. Okay, so let's have a look here. Like, finding names for things is super hard. So currently it's named Stitches, and it's currently like a CSS package, like the core of it. But it will be very easy for us to, for example, create a styled version for React, for example. So you get like a similar API, like more integrated with components. But you can use it straight away, and that's what I'm going to show you. So why would you even consider this compared to other CSS and JS solutions? First of all, it has like an atomic mindset. So every CSS property you define is self-contained. It's kind of like self-contained and part of the bigger CSS picture. And when it's self-contained, each CSS property, given the same screen and pseudo, and the value you pass to it, of course, is the same. So we have a high degree of reusability. So if you were to use color red, it doesn't matter where you use color red in the rest of your app, it will actually reuse that CSS. It won't do like a new injection for that. And we also do optimal injection. So when you write your code, we don't do any injection there. It's when you actually consume the CSS in a component, that is when it actually does the injection. On top of this, it's tokenized, just like Classy UI. You can set tokens for everything, and I will show you how that works. You can set screens to handle media queries. I'll show that as well. And you can also add utility properties. So you can actually add your own CSS properties. And then it's, of course, fully typed and all that stuff. What I wanted to show you first is that the library is currently at 1.6 kilobytes, which is pretty awesome. We can look at style components, which is 12.5 kilobytes. Of course, it also handles the component part, but we are going to get far beneath that with this approach. Not that like size is the biggest factor when deciding a library, but it could be. It depends on the project, of course. But we're super happy that we actually solve all the specificity issues and everything in that amount of size. Okay, so let's look at how this works. So here we have like a typical Code Sandbox example with React and TypeScript. So what we can do here, we can maybe convert this font family and text align into stitches. So instead of importing that one, we're going to import CSS from stitches CSS. And then instead of adding a pure class name here, we are going to say CSS compose font family sans serif, I think it was. And then we're going to say text align. And as you can see, we're getting all the type help here. So you get center here, for example, and all that good stuff. Okay, so by default, you can just import CSS and you can start writing your CSS freely, as you can see here. But there's a different way to do this with stitches, and that is to configure your own instance of stitches, which gives you even more functionality. But before we go into that, we can also see that if I, for example, do color red, and we want it to happen on hover. So the second argument is the pseudo selectors. And as you can see, we are not doing any typing or anything here because this is a language in itself. There's no way to kind of like create a typed API for this. It will just be horrible. Yes, but let us now create our own instance instead. And we do that by saying, and then we rather create CSS. And as you can see, it works exactly the same way. But let us now explore some of the options you can pass here. So first of all, the most interesting thing is tokens. So the tokens are based on system UI. So you have things like colors, size, space, stuff like that. So maybe we can look at colors first. And let's add like a red thing here, tomato. And what you can see happens now is that we're getting a type error here because the colors actually map to everything that's related to color in CSS, so like color, background color, border color and stuff. And when you start using tokens, the API expects you to use those tokens. It should feel really icky to bypass the the tokens, because the tokens is what gives you constraints in your system. So if you want to, like, you can see it still uses red here, so you can say like as any here. Like this is what we do when we hack something in TypeScript, and it should feel just as bad to do it with the tokens. It's kind of the point. It should be easy to do the right thing and difficult to do the wrong thing. But if we rather look at what alternatives we have here, as you can see, we're getting red here. And when we hover now, we're getting the tomato color. So that's tokens, and you can also do like space, and then this is 1 rem, and we have 2 rem, and when we now use margin, for example, you can see that we have 0 and 1 here. So let's, like that. Yes. So this is really interesting. So margin in itself, it looks like a normal property, but it's not actually inserting a margin CSS property. It's actually deriving to margin top, margin bottom, margin left, and margin right. So this is what we do under the hood for you to handle specificity. And also if we were to use like duplicate colors or like crashing properties, we ensure that you will always see the correct or the expected properties. So if I were to add color blue here, you would see blue, as you can see here. And that doesn't seem like it's such a big problem. And in this single case, it's not a problem. But when you compose many different pieces of CSS together, you have no guarantee that the order you insert the class names reflects the order in the CSS definition. And it's actually the CSS definition that decides which one of these win. It's not the order you insert the class names. But we have a method that's super optimized to manage that. Okay, so that's tokens. Now let's look at screens. So screens is basically just a way for you to just define screens, and it's based on media queries. So media, min width 700 pixels. We want to insert this rule like that. So what happens now is that, let's add another color here, green, that can be lime. Okay, so let's imagine that we want a special behavior when we're on tablet. So we can say CSS, and now we actually have tablet as a property here. And under that property, we have the CSS again. So we want to change the color to green, and we want that also to be on hover. So currently now it's green, but if I make it smaller, it's tomato again. So this is how you compose together screens. And again, each of these properties are atomic. They are self-contained, which is why we have the screen, the value, and the pseudo within every single property definition, because they live on their own. Yes. Okay, and so you would could have multiple screens here, and we also solve specificity here, so that, for example, if we were to have laptop, that would need to be, that's more specific, because that would be like, for example, min width 1024 pixels, which means that that one should override the tablet when it's active, which is why it comes after tablet. So that is how we handle screen specificity. It's basically the media queries needs to be in order, nothing more than that. And then we have utils. So a very popular thing is to, which would be nice to have in CSS, is to have like a vertical or horizontal margin, for example. And we can just create that. So let's say margin X, and then we get the util CSS in here. And then we also get a value. And currently, what I want is to actually, since I have tokens for space, I want to reuse that as the value here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move tokens up here, and then I'm going to use the create tokens factory because that one gives me some typing help. And then I can say that the value here should be key of type of token space. And then I also want to be able to pass in the pseudo optionally. And then I say util CSS, which is exactly the same as the other one. Margin left, value pseudo, margin right, value pseudo. Now, and you can do tons of different things with these utilities, but yeah, let's just see how it works now. So let us do CSS margin X. Now we have that one. And again, it shows us the tokens. So yes, that shows you the utilities. So this is basically how you build it up. You can start freely and you can only import the CSS and then you just freely use that. And the nice thing about that is you don't have to think about anything else. You just use it and then it will work optimally. If you do async stuff or whatever, it doesn't matter. It will just work, and optimally so, with a minimum payload. If you are to create your own CSS instance, you get more flexibility. Like you can constrain your design by using tokens. You can set up screens to handle different screens. And you can also add your custom utilities to more efficiently express your design. So the question is, like, how would you use this with React? I'm using it very directly now. But you could rather split this up. So you kind of like put your configuration in one file, and then you rather pass the CSS instance on the provider. And then you have like a use CSS hook, which allows you to use the hook instead, and then decouple the instance from the configuration, meaning you can change it out for testing, for server-side rendering, and stuff like that. And we will show more of that as we move on. We also plan to implement like a styled version where you actually create components, much like style components, but you express the CSS like this instead. Yes. Cool. Again, the reason I made this video was to say that we're going to deprecate Classy UI and give a huge thanks to everyone who has given us feedback and helped us learn and challenge us to figure out a different way to think about CSS in JS and how to do it. And we're super excited to share our ideas, and the source code, as you saw on the bundle size, is pretty small. And we hope that will inspire other CSS and JS libraries as well to take a look at this kind of way to express CSS. Okay, that's it for now. Again, really sorry, but we strongly believe that we're doing the right thing, because we would not be able to follow up on Classy UI in the same way we can follow up on this. Also, in terms of contributing to the ecosystem, this is a much better contribution because it's much easier to learn from and reuse. Like style components could kind of like use this under the hood, for example, or make changes to how they handle specificity based on how we do it, for example. Yes, okay, bye for now. Talk to you later.